We call our study All the Wiser because we think that wisdom is not necessarily in the one, like a one person, but is found in all across the system. So for us, the system is defined as a decision-making scenario with two people in it for our purposes. As we talked about before, the break is that the system can take several states. One is it can be concentrated in one person, and we can handle that, but also that it could be found, the competencies could be found across several players. So here's our underlying framework, basically. We're trying to tackle Baltus's challenge to study wisdom in action, basically wisdom behavior. So it's not hypothetical, what would you do? It's not retrospective, what did you do? And it's not normative, what should you do? What are you doing in this decision-making situation? What are you looking at? What are you deciding, and what happens? Another key point is that with this, we're trying to separate the wisdom competencies, what individuals can bring to the game, from the wise outcomes of what are the effects. We are looking in particular at, as competencies, awareness and skill across three levels, as we were talking before the break. The self, your own country, the other country, and then the system, which is, again, the relationships, the arrows. If you're looking at the system, you're focusing on the arrows between the entities, not the entities themselves. Some of our working hypotheses is that we think that awareness at the system level is key to more wise outcomes, will be associated with more wise outcomes. And that skill, not just more skill in terms of handling yourself and dealing with yourself and with others, but also in terms of the reasoning between perception and decision. And we're looking at that in terms of management scholar Chris Argyris's ladder of inference, which looks at meanings, assumptions, beliefs, what's going on between the decision that you make and the perceptions. And where we get that information is we're constantly asking them why they're doing the things that they're doing, and also through the social interaction. That social interaction is key not only for stimulating game dynamics, but also providing us with some variables. So again, as I was saying, you can handle the wise person because all of the awareness and skill could be in one person among the dyad, but it also could be spread across two people in the dyad to get the wise outcome.
So the first obstacle is that there's a lack of, a shared definition that's kind of operational and tactical that we can go out there and use. And for our purposes, because we're looking at how individuals contribute, but how the outcomes might be something like global happiness that is at the systemic level, it really is very important for us to have definitions of the causal side, the competencies, as well as of the output side. So how do we come up with this? That's a very intricate kind of problem. And so the kinds of constraints we used, I wanted to share with you just kind of as idea generators. One is we don't have this kind of crisp philosophical definition, categorical definition of what is and is not wise, but we have symptoms, right, that people generally agree upon. Things that optimize the common good tend to be more wise. Not always. Sometimes, situationally, I should optimize my own utilities. But in general, that seems to be, so more of that more often is more wise. And then there's this long versus short-term sort of time horizon. Longer-term sustainable solutions tend to be thought of as more wise in many cases than others. Again, these are symptoms. They don't all have to be present maximally all the time, but we're using them. So as Seana said, we're doing a feasibility study here to see, does this approach make sense? Right? Can we collect sensible data? Can we make any sense of it? What we plan to do is use multi-level statistical models, which will give us, in principle, a way to look at so if there's a wise person in the system and you sort of run this repeatedly, or with a bunch of wise people, most of the information will show up in the parameters that characterize the individual level. If it's distributed more, but you're still getting wise outcomes, you should see that at kind of the group level. So you can start to see, there's 90% of the information at one level or another, or it's 50-50 or whatever it is, and it will vary across groups, of course, depending on what people bring to the table. But what's more interesting to me, I think, is looking at the interactions between variables, we might get some insight into how people who bring different pieces of the puzzle in combination with each other can actually sort of drive higher levels of wisdom. Okay, so just to wrap up and summarize really, we're trying to study wisdom in a more controlled way in action, right? And allowing for not only the wise person scenario, which we want to account for, but where the wisdom can be distributed and you can get wise outcomes without a wise person, perhaps. And so our approach is analytically separate, figure out what are the competencies you care about, and we could plug in other competency models like the Moore model, right? Or the affective forecasting model. Those are competency models, and then you would, of course, have probably a different outcome variable. Separating those, operationalizing them so we can measure them, putting them into the dynamics, and then trying to reintegrate them using the statistical model. But to do that, there's nowhere to hide. So we're sort of pushed to the limit here in having to make real the things that we kind of talk about at a more abstract level.